the other like really strange thing about growing up in the 70s and the 80s is that like culturally, at least in the United States, like there was this idea of assimilation, which doesn't like, and you can watch like these like weird cartoons about it now, but the idea was that like if you speak English and you just adopt all the sort of Americanisms of like, apple pie and baseball and like hot dogs and Monday Night Football, like we'll treat you like Americans. So like, and so my parents like read the, brochure as it were. And they're like, well, this sounds great. Like, we're going to be Americans. You're like, okay, Phuc and Lou, like you guys be Americans too. And, obviously there's like all this fine print, right? Like racism, and like patriarchy and like xenophobia, which my parents like didn't really, they weren't really like, didn't understand. Like it, like, it takes like if you're not from the United States, like you don't really understand the subtleties or even the overt, sort of racism that can happen and does happen, right? Like if you're a foreigner, you're just like, I don't know, like maybe this is like a cultural thing and I don't, so it's like, I think for my brother and for me growing up in the 70s and 80s, like, as we were becoming Americanized, and we're like, oh, this is like racist and this is that. And my parents were like, what are you talking about? Like, you're just lucky to be here, I'm like, oh my God. Like, so that was like a barrier.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Situation Room for Season 2. We are back at it, resuming our journey into Asian America to talk about the Asian American Pacific Islander, or AAPI, issues, culture, and stories. As always, we dive deep into the Asian American community, from questions like, where are you really from? And representation, to sharing food and our own experiences. My name is Emilie Villaverde.
I'm Zach. This week we have an incredible episode for you. We interviewed Phuc Tran, the author of SIGH, a Misfit's memory of great books, punk rock, and the fight to fit in. This book was recognized as an Amazon Best Book of the Year, editors pick on Audible, and an April must-listen at Apple Books. Critics love it, but also Emily and I do too.
Yes, this was an incredible interview, you guys. In our conversation with Phuc for this interview, we talked about his Asian American experience as a Vietnamese refugee growing up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. During this time, Phuc was surrounded in the 80s punk rock scene and trying to find a sense of belonging. He called his assimilation experience as, quote unquote, the fight to fit in. In his book, he discusses how luck has played a role in his life, how opportunity meets preparation, and living with authenticity and shameless identity. We are so excited to promote his book and share this incredible interview with you guys. So stay tuned.
Yes, this is one of my favorite interviews, I think, that we've done. I say that a lot, but
He says that with every guest.
It's so good.
But this was an incredible interview, and I loved reading this book. You guys should definitely pick up a copy if you guys find it at your local bookstore.
I found it really relatable. I guess that I'm also like, yeah, I also grew up in Pennsylvania. But like, even if you are not Asian, I think this is like a super relatable book because it's kind of like a young adult, like memoir, right? And like young adult books, what makes them interesting and like appeal to a lot of different people is that like all of us at one point or will be young adults, like all older adults were young adults at one point, so they can relate to that experience. And so like going through that in his memoir, you can definitely feel some of those themes and reflect about in your own life too. But one of the things I thought was funny is when I picked up this book from the mail, I opened it and I was going like up my driveway with my dad, and he saw it and he goes, I have a picture of myself or him that looks like that, like an 80s yearbook picture. And I thought that was really funny.
Yes, I also really liked the conversation that we have about authenticity and identity. It's something that definitely sparks interest in a lot of young readers, and for people like Zach and myself who have no shame expressing our identity and who we are as individuals. This was, again, like I mentioned, it's an incredible book. You guys should definitely pick up a copy, whether it's at your local bookstore or even online. But yeah, if you guys are ready, let's jump into this interview.
Let's get to it. All right. Hi, Phuc. Welcome into the Situation Room. We are super excited to have you. Tell us about yourself, your story, and your book, Saigon, and we'll get into it.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me, y'all. I'm Phuc Tran. So I was born in Saigon, Vietnam. My family fled to the United States in 1975 after the Civil War ended in Vietnam. And then we ended up growing up or being sponsored by a family. And I ended up growing up in small town PA, in a small town called Carlisle, which nobody's ever heard of except for Zach, apparently. And maybe Emilie too, I don't know. And then, so I grew up there as like the only Vietnamese family. And one of the only, I was like the only, Asian kid or even Vietnamese kid, up through like middle school in my classes in my school. Well, let's see, I'll fast forward. This is like all spoilers from the book. So I graduated high school, went off to college at Bard College. I ended up majoring in classical languages and literature, went to grad school, blah, blah, blah. And then I moved to New York City where I taught Latin during the day and I apprenticed to be a tattooer at night. And so I have had sort of a career. Like my day job is, I don't know which my day job is, it depends, right? It's like which is like Batman's real identity? Is it, is it Batman or is it Bruce Wayne? But so I've been a tattooer and a Latin teacher since 1997. I'm on hiatus from teaching just briefly while I work on some writing, but I'm still tattooing, and I live in Portland, Maine. Yeah. Oh, and so in 2012, I gave a TEDx talk about a bunch of stuff, but mostly about like grammar and identity and language. And because of that TEDx talk, I got some attention from a literary agent, and she approached me and said, "Oh, it seems like you have an interesting story. Maybe have you thought about writing a memoir?" And I was like, "Ah, sure, why not? Like, let's give it a shot." And then I wrote this book that came out during a pandemic, so that was really good timing. No, it's been pretty incredible. Just hearing people's reactions to it. Yeah, there it is. Yep. Product placement. Nice job.
We love it.
Thanks.
Yep. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the book. Actually, when I first got the package, so I have one of those like middle of nowhere Pennsylvania driveways, so it's like super long. And so I was in the car with my dad, and he goes, "I think that's your package." So we stop at the mailbox. I open it. He looks at it. He goes, "I have a picture just like that." Because I think nice. You and my dad are about the same age, and so I thought that was funny.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So I wrote this coming of age memoir about growing up in a small town in PA, and like sort of like the things that I latched onto to create a sense of community for myself, so it was mostly through reading great books and the sort of 80s punk rock skateboard scene. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited to have you in the Situation Room today, Phuc, but let's just dive right into it. I am really fascinated with how your story starts, and you write about it in your book and you talk about it in your TED Talk. And I just wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit about how your family made it to the United States and give our listeners a little bit of backstory about that.
Sure. So my let's see. So my father was a lawyer in Vietnam, and then my mother's parents, my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, worked for the U.S. Embassy. So my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, were the only ones who were fluent in English in our family. And then sort of like when it all sort of started, unraveling. The U.S. government, incredibly so, actually, decided that they needed to evacuate any employees and collaborators who were in South Vietnam and in Saigon. And so, as part of that operation, I think they evacuated like 130,000 South Vietnamese nationals. Which is like
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising to me just to thinking about how. Like hearing sort of like NPR stories. I heard this one that I was really struck by about an Afghanistan translator, Afghani. What?
I think so,
yeah, Afghani translator, and how his Air Force counterpart, American Air Force counterpart, was trying to secure his escape from Afghanistan because like he and his entire family were targets because he was, helping translate for the Americans. And the interview was with this American soldier, and he was feeling such incredible guilt because like it wasn't successful, and like his family was receiving death threats, and like and just to think about like a federal policy where somebody somewhere, maybe the president, who knows, like recognizes the moral imperative that comes with having people, who are collaborating with you, and the peril that they are subjected to when they agree to work with you. And then to recognize it, to allocate all these resources to helping them escape, because like if they don't, then like all these people are just going to get dragged into a ditch and shot, and it's very easy for like an imperial power just to be like, not our problem. Can I swear on your podcast?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so they'd be like, yeah, fuck them, like them's the breaks, so like
Yeah.
so my family was part of that like lucky, maybe it was moral, maybe it wasn't, maybe there was like some other, I don't know, trade-off that I don't know about. Like I'm not sure what the American government stood to gain by evacuating 130,000 Vietnamese people, but they did, and so my family was part of that. And anyway, I don't know why I went down that tangent, but I guess what I'm saying is that like we don't see that
anymore.
It's not like a blueprint that like the American government or the military does all the time. So for whatever reason, like we, they just happen to do it at that moment in history. So I feel incredibly fortunate there. And so the day that we were supposed to leave, like my whole family, this is a spoiler. Should I like tell the story from the book about like, So my family, so my grandparent, I mean, this is also crazy. Like it's like, Southeast Asian family, there's like 20 million cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff. So my grandparents had to pick like 12 people, so it was like, okay, it was like dodgeball. It's like, okay, you, and you. Okay, let's go. And so we were waiting to get on a bus to leave Saigon. And and then like we're in a long line, like we get on the bus finally, like it's like people get on, they leave, they get on, the bus like gets packed full, and then finally we get on the bus, and like I'm like 1.5, almost 2, and I just start freaking out and crying, and like my grandmother is like, oh my god, she's like, okay, let's just get off the bus, like Phuc is being super annoying. And so everyone got off the bus after we had waited, and they're like, we'll just get on the next bus. And then we let the people in line behind us get on the bus. And then as that bus was pulling away, it got hit by like a rocket and like blew up like right there. And like everybody on the bus died. And then, so we were just like, well, that was lucky, and then we just waited for the next bus, got on that next bus. That one didn't blow up. And then we got on some airplanes and helicopters and stuff. And then ended up in, Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania in 1975.
Wow. Every time I like read that or listen to it, I'm like, wow.
Yeah, and there's no rhyme or reason to that, like it's really like, I think to me, like I think about, I mean, that's like been like part of our family story for so long, and I think my grandmother and my parents would say that there's something kind of divine or miraculous in there. And I think my problem with that is that it makes it sound like we deserved to live more than other people did. They're like, oh, God saved us. And I'm like, really? Like God saved us, but he didn't save all those other like people on the bus in front of us? Like that doesn't sit well with me. Like, and I know that the opposite of that is just like, it's random. And that makes people really nervous. But I think I'm okay with that, because I think there's a lot of like random sort of lucky things that happen in your life, and sometimes they break your way and sometimes they don't. And I don't think we account for it enough, like the randomness of things, and because it makes us feel nervous, and it makes us feel like, well, what is the meaning of the universe, and like, is everything super random? And it kind of is. Like there's like a bazillion TED Talks about that, like about how we don't account for sort of the randomized sort of probability. Exactly. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah. It's weird that like everything that's ever happened is led to this moment. It's like weird to think about. But we want to give it meaning, right? Like we want to like give it some meaning or something. Yeah. Everything has meaning, according to humans. My favorite line in the book. So one of my favorite lines of the book is on page 3. It's we were rural royalty, Dairy Queens and Burger Kings. This was small town PA, poorly read, very white, collar blue. And I really relate to those lines because I mean I don't think where I grew up is like too rural because it's like Philly suburbs, but it's like on the border of Philly suburbs and like Amish country. And so like, but the thing is like there's a state highway that connects the two worlds, and on the side of that there's a shopping center. That I worked at the Dairy Queen across from the Burger
I love it.
for 4 years.
You
Yeah.
know, I know. That was like, it's really funny. Like, I literally in my town, I was like, okay, like those were like the two beacons, you know? Like, I mean, there's other fast food places too, but yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah. So like, oh my God, I have a lot of Dairy Queen stories, but that's a whole nother thing. But
Yeah, that's a different podcast, right?
that is a different podcast. But can you tell us more about like Carlisle and growing up there in like the 80s and being a Vietnamese refugee? Because like right now for us, like when we grew up in like the 2000s and 2010s, like the world is very different, obviously,
Yeah, thank God, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things, right? Like the way that, so when the federal government brought all the 130,000 Vietnamese refugees over, there were 4 relocation camps set up in the U.S. There was like one in Arkansas, there was one in Pennsylvania, one in Florida, and then one in Southern California. And then, and like, because there wasn't like an established, like there were basically like no Vietnamese people here in the US prior to like 1975. There's like a handful, but like not many at all. And so the government actually set up this policy. It was called the Refugee Dispersion Policy. And they were like, okay, we need to accelerate their, sort of assimilation as quickly as possible. So we're going to spread these Vietnamese refugees out as far from each other as possible so that they don't, like, literally it's in the language of the policy, so they don't form ethnic enclaves, which they felt would be sort of a barrier to learning English and like figuring out American culture and stuff. Maybe true, maybe not. We'll never know. And so, yeah. So we were sponsored by these like nice Lutherans in Carlisle. And so like basically like your whole family was at the refugee relocation center. And then once like an American family came along, it was a little bit like, I don't know, the Humane Society or something, like, oh, they look nice, we'll take them. I mean, it's like much more humanized than that. But anyway, they were our sponsors, and they would sort of like see us through like the, finding a job and finding an apartment and all that stuff. And so they were in Carlisle. That's the only reason we ended up in Carlisle, was because our sponsor families were there. So we went to Carlisle, and so, yeah, I mean, there was, from like, there were a few other Vietnamese families that would come and go. Like they would come for like 6 months to a year and then like peace out. And for whatever reason, like my family was the only family that stayed. And my parents, like, even when there were other Vietnamese families in the area, like my parents didn't really like associate with them or hang out with them. And again, like it was pretty transitory, so like in my little world as like a grade school kid, like there just there was never other Vietnamese kids in my classes, and definitely, and even in school, like I was like the only Asian kid in school through 5th grade. And then there were like a few other Asian, like once I got to like middle school, and like elementary schools kind of funneled together, there would be like 1 or 2 other kids, but like never in my classes. Like, yeah, I think I was the only Asian kid in my classes through high school, like in like sort of like academic classes, like until like junior year, maybe. Like it's wild, right? You're just like, yeah. So, and the other like really strange thing about growing up in the 70s and the 80s is that like culturally, at least in the United States, like there was this idea of assimilation, which doesn't like, and you can watch like these like weird cartoons about it now, but the idea was that like if you speak English and you just adopt all the sort of Americanisms of like, apple pie and baseball and like hot dogs and Monday Night Football, like we'll treat you like Americans. So like, and so my parents like read the, brochure, as it were, and they're like, well, this sounds great. Like, we're going to be Americans. You're like, okay, Phuc and Lou, like you guys be Americans too. And, obviously there's like all this fine print, right? Like racism, and like patriarchy and like xenophobia, which my parents like didn't really, they weren't really like, didn't understand. Like it, like, it takes like if you're not from the United States, like you don't really understand the subtleties or even the overt sort of racism that can happen and does happen, right? Like if you're a foreigner, you're just like, I don't know, like maybe this is like a cultural thing and I don't, so it's like,
Mhm.
I think for my brother and for me growing up in the 70s and 80s, like, as we were becoming Americanized, and we're like, oh, this is like racist and this is that. And my parents were like, what are you talking about? Like, you're just lucky to be here, I'm like, oh my God. Like, so that was like a barrier, sort of going back to what you were saying before, Zach, about like that conversation about racism. And like, there's like this intergenerational sort of gap that like, you're constantly trying to bridge about like talking to your parents about like things like racism. And my parents are like, well, you could be dead. So, count your blessings. And you're like, okay, like.
Yeah, it's crazy to think because in your book you talked about the Americanization that you went through, and I actually, it's one of the parts that I remember from the book, and you talk about how Americanization was kind of like your survival tactic to avoid being bullied and to try and fit in, because the more American you seemed, the more likely you're going to fit in, the less attention you draw to yourself.
So I thought,
Um,
right?
yeah. And it's crazy to think because even now there have been, like, at least in my experience, it's the same thing. You can still see it repeats throughout history. And I really related to that part of the book because growing up, I was one of the very few Filipino students in my class. And I think when I graduated from high school, there was about 500 students in my graduating class. There might have been only maybe 2 or 3 other Filipino students with me in our class, and I didn't even know who exactly, like, who was Filipino, who wasn't, because I felt like I was the only one.
Hmm.
And I remember, and I've mentioned this in past podcast episodes, that I also used Americanization as my kind of quote unquote, survival tactic for bullying and just trying to fit in with the bigger crowds. And whether that was, I stopped bringing traditional Filipino foods for lunch and I brought Lunchables and Capri Sun, and I begged my parents to let me shop at Limited 2 and go to like all of these like name brand stores so that I could wear the brands I could fit in, because that was my survival tactics. It made me, think about what you went through in your book and what you used as your survival strategies to fit in with the crowds, or what you thought would work, and compare it to, my life and what other people probably in this day and age are going through now and what they're using to try, whether it's trying to fit in or unfortunately try to cover up their true identities.
Hmm.
So I really resonated with that part of the book. And, I was curious, what made you decide to write this memoir? And, I wanted to ask, when did you have that realization that, you had a story to tell and, it was time for you to share it with other people?
Sure. Yeah. And I'd love to, if I could react to a little bit of what you're saying before, like, I'm shocked that like that, shocked and like not shocked, I guess, that like that is still a mindset for like a lot of, I guess, underrepresented people, right? Like this idea that like you have to fit into mainstream culture, right? Which, is just sort of like code for like white culture, because like white culture sees itself as like the norm, right? Like that's problematic. And, I'm sure you can read all about that and like, your take a sociology class, right? But it's sort of like norm, sort of dominant culture establishes the norm, right? And then everything else is this sort of like degrees of aberration from the norm. Boy, I really wish that I really wish that you had said like, oh, things in 2000, they're like so chill. And like, like, it's like, dang, like, it's like Emilie's still like going through the same thing. And, and I also want to just say, like, I put in that phrase, like the fight to fit in the title very specifically. And, because of how problematic it is. Like there are lots of things that are problematic about like how I grew up and how I saw myself and like all the stuff that I internalized, but I didn't want to make excuses for it as I was telling the story. Like I just wanted to lay it out there because I mean, for a number of reasons, and I can talk about it later or not. But like, I didn't want to do like sort of like Monday morning quarterbacking, or like, you know, sort of do this like historical revisionism or revision where like I try to rewrite things. Like I emotionally speaking, like I wanted to just be like, this is how I felt in high school. Like it's obviously not how I feel now as like a grown ass man, but like, you know, like when you're 16, like this is how you know, you think that like, oh, if I just be less Vietnamese, then kids will accept me more, because like, you know, that's clearly like the sticking point. So, you know, fighting in or fitting in is, you know, it means that like you have to change parts of yourself, right? And like to fit into something, like I have to like tuck this in or hide this, or, you know, put on concealer. And, you know, Brene Brown says this really smart thing. You know, she says that the opposite of fitting in is belonging, you know, and that's really what we are looking for. But, you know, as a teenage kid, you don't know that. Like you want to belong somewhere. You don't want to like change yourself so that you fit in somewhere. Like you want to find your tribe of people, right? And people who understand you, value you, and can see you for who you are. Anyway, yeah. So the genesis of the book came from the TED Talk, really. So before I gave that TED Talk in 2012, like I never really publicly talked about like my refugee story or growing up in small town PA, just like partly, you know, because like I was still in the mindset of like nobody wants to hear this story. It's so weird. Like it's so particular to who I am. And it just didn't sound like anyone else's story, you know, and I was still sort of in that mindset of like, if this doesn't sound like someone else's story, who wants to hear the story? Like it just is too weird, you know? So I just never talked about it. And then in 2012, I had the chance to give this TED Talk, and I just thought, you know, and, and I'd been through a lot of therapy and counseling at that point, like up to that point, like I'd maybe had just wrapped up, so I was feeling like super comfortable with who I was and my story, and luck. I mean, this is very much like luck in the sense of like not getting on the exploding bus luck. Like I just finished counseling, my daughter had just been born. And then this chance to give the TED Talk came up, and I was like, fuck it. Like, I'm going to swing for the fences. Like, I'm going to literally talk about like being a refugee, you know, 80s pop culture, Star Wars, grammar, like whatever I can talk about. Like, I'm just going to like talk about everything that I love in 12 minutes, you know, like what could possibly go wrong. But I just figured if I'm going to fail, I might as well fail spectacularly. And people really dug the talk, and I got picked up by like National Public Radio and stuff like that. And then after that, the reception to the talk anyway, I started doing like live storytelling in Portland. Like it's sort of like a version of like the Moth Radio, where like you just get up on stage and you have like 7 minutes to tell a true story from your life. And so I did like I did that like one or two times a year. Like I would like write a story from my life, you know, perform it. It's not like stand up. It's just like you get up and you tell a story. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're sad. And like every time I did it, like I would be like, oh, people really liked it. Like, I guess maybe people want to hear more of my stories and like what I have to say. So that, like after like maybe 2 or 3 years of that, I was like, oh, like when I'm like 70 and like I have like nothing to do and like my legs don't work anymore, I'll probably write a book. Like, so I had the idea in my brain that I would write a memoir, but it was like more about like when my body was all broken down and the only thing that was working left was my brain. Like I would just like write the story. But then my agent contacted me in 2016. Well, my soon to be agent in 2016, she contacted me and said, you know, asked me if, you know, I was interested in writing a memoir because she had seen the TED Talk. So yeah. Again, that was also lucky, right? I mean, there's a lot of just like, you know, you're just in the right place at the right time. Although someone once said, you know, luck is really just like opportunity plus preparation, meaning that like you have to have like the shot. Like, I guess I could have been a shitty writer, you know, and then she would have been like, hey, you want to write a memoir? And I've been like, sure. And then like I send her a sample of my writing and she's like, oh, this sucks, you know, and then she'll be like, yeah, good luck. But so I think there's a confluence of, you know, I had like the writing chops to write the story and she just happened to sort of ping me at the right time. But yeah.
That's a common phrase in like business speak, you know, like
which
opportunity meets preparation.
It is. Yeah. I heard that somewhere and it seems to make sense to me, right? Yeah. Like, yeah, because you could have the opportunity or you could be super prepared and just never have the chance, right? So there's a kind of randomized luck. going back to what Emily was asking also, like I didn't, I think I was writing the story for myself, primarily. Like I just wanted to get it down, and I felt like I had something to say and for myself. Like I don't think I have such like sort of delusions of grandeur that I'm like, I'm going to really speak to the Asian American experience or the Vietnamese American experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think we're not a monolith. Like, I mean, Asians are not a monolith, and not even like Vietnamese people are not a monolith. You read like something that like I write versus something that like Ocean Vuong writes, and then something that like Viet Thanh Nguyen writes. Like they're all so different, and that's part of the richness of it, I think, and it's part of what makes it amazing, like the storytelling. It's like you think about just even like sort of like African American literature, right? Like Black literature is like so different. Like Richard Wright is not James Baldwin, and neither of them is like Ralph Ellison. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask because at school I study creative writing as well. I'm an English minor, and I've taken a lot of creative writing and storytelling classes for this minor, and listening to different people share their reasons for the stories that they have to tell or the pieces that they write, I I just get sucked right into it, and I feel like I'm just immersed in the experience in a whole other way. Because reading Saigon, it was not only allowing me to tap into, your personal story and get a glimpse of the experiences that you went through to, just mold you into who you are today through this memoir. I loved it.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
and you take an incredible step with being vulnerable and just talking about different themes that you came across throughout your life. And I really do commend you for being so vulnerable through your book, because
Oh,
that
thanks.
takes a lot and it's not easy to write and be vulnerable. I've learned that myself through poetry classes and short story classes. That's actually the one thing that my professors had trouble with when it came to critiquing my writing, was I wasn't being vulnerable enough. And I was also writing about my experience growing up. All of my writing pieces are based on me growing up Filipino American. And then I also started tying in Filipino folklore. And I just tried grasping at the different aspects of my culture. And for some reason, my professors didn't think that was vulnerable enough. And, something was blocking it. So I commend you for being very vulnerable in Saigon. It was incredible.
Oh,
But
well,
I want,
I mean, shout out to like, counseling and mental health, right? I mean, I think like
yeah,
that,
definitely.
like that really didn't get me to a place of, to be able to share that, and on my writing notebook, I had a little note to myself that just said, whatever you're afraid to write that. So that was just like a nice reminder to myself to just like, if I ever felt like I shouldn't write something, that's when I definitely should write it.
That's
I like that.
incredible.
Yeah.
Were you always vulnerable, or was this a really big challenge, just to write and release Saigon?
I think it came along really with like, I know I sound like a spokesperson, it's like an infomercial for like counseling now, but like I think processing like my childhood and like my relationship with my parents and like growing up in Carlisle, and just giving myself like the permission and the tools to metabolize those experiences in a, I think, healthy way, like really gave me permission to talk about them, because like now I'm not feeling shame about them. Like it's just sort of like who I am, and like like I think like I accept myself, and if people don't, well, fuck them. Like I don't, it's not my, you know what I mean? Like if someone doesn't like me,
Yeah.
is that my problem or theirs? It's their problem, right? But when you're a little kid and you're growing up, you're like, oh, that's me. Like I did something for that person to not like me, and it takes and then if you have like kind of like dysfunctional parents on top of that, then you're just like, what am I doing? So it takes a long time to kind of get to a point where like you have a sense of like, okay, is this me or is this other people, right? And very quickly you can figure out like, like who's the fuck up in this situation? Is this me or is it other people? And sometimes it's me, like I fully own that, and sometimes it's other people, and but anyway, yeah. thanks for acknowledging the vulnerability, and I really appreciate that. It definitely was an uncomfortable read for, you know, like my brother, and I think my parents. It was, you know, I can imagine it was hard for them to read.
Yeah, I think it's I know just writing about something that's personal and vulnerable, it's not only hard to write, but it's also hard for other people to, you know, take in and read and absorb. So again, I commend you for all of that. It really did touch me, and you know, I felt like you shared something extremely personal, and it wasn't just through the vulnerability that you shared through your book um, that allowed your readers to have a different type of connection with you and your experiences. But there are, you know, different things throughout the book. And one thing that you bring up are these quote unquote universal themes. And you emphasize important questions in the very beginning in the prologue of your book. And some of these universal themes of great literature include love, acceptance, a place of belonging, and that in a way shape those important questions that you talk about throughout your book. I want to talk about acceptance and a place of belonging because I know we touched up on it a little while ago, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper. So every young adult and kid wants to be accepted by, you know, their peers and their community. We talked about it. It's something that, you know, you struggled with or you experienced growing up, and like I mentioned before, it repeats itself throughout history, maybe not in the same way, but it molds and it fits into the society so that there are still kids you know, that are afraid to express their true identities, and they're afraid to, you know, showcase things that they really should be proud of. And you know, sometimes we have to find a group that we have to fit in with. And when I first read this, I was taken aback by um when you mentioned the role of being a punk rock skater because it threw me off completely. With, you know, upbringing, 'cause I honestly forgot that that was a group in like the social community. Like you have the preps, you have the athletes, and then you have the skaters and you have the punk rock kids. And I completely it tapped into a part of, you know, my memories that I forgot was there. Um
That's great.
and it's interesting because there are so many different groups in, you know, that social community, and there are different groups of different people. They do different things, they act different ways, but in the grand scheme of things, they just want to find acceptance and find their own place in society. So I want to ask, what did it mean or look like to be punk to you?
I mean, you know, I think growing up in small town, well, I mean, you know, obviously the music, right, is like,
Hmm.
you know, like you can't be like a punk, you know, you can't like be into punk rock and not like punk rock music, being like, oh, that's too loud, oh, too much swearing. So, you know, I mean, I think it was like a sense of community. Like it was like a really, at least in my small town, you know, where there were like maybe, you know, 10 to 12 like punk kids in like my whole town, like, and like the rednecks were always trying to like fight you and like throwing stuff at you like anytime they saw you. So it was like really, like I think like they were the first group of kids who had my back in a fight, you know, for like the first time ever. And I was like, oh my gosh, like these guys are going to stick up for me, you know, like,
Hmm.
and you know, like for me, like it was very much like it was like very much like a real like survival, like these are the guys that like are gonna look out for me in high school. You know, like I don't know who else I have, like, because prior to that I was just hanging out with like comic book nerds who like just didn't, you know, they were just getting, you know, picked on all the time. And I think there was like a humanity in me. I was like, I don't want to, you know, get shoved into lockers all the time. And like, you know, like I want to stand up to these guys, but there's like 6 of them, you know, like this is not going to go well. So, but I mean, I also like really love the music. And I think, you know, like I think for me, like I think so there's like a kind of a, you know, iconoclasm to punk rock where it's just kind of like whatever the rules are, like we're going to reject them and like come up with rules that work for us, you know. And so I think for me, like punk rock, like it checked off so many boxes, you know. Like I think there's like the cultural slash sort of social critique of it where I was like, yeah, like society is fucked up. Like, why does society make me feel like I want to do, you know, fit in and like be like other people and like be like cookie cutter, especially in the 80s. Like, so the rebellion against that was really powerful. And then also like just sort of like the, you know, it was the first time that like I heard in sort of popular culture or in music, like other kids talking about like sort of like their parents not really understanding them and like the dysfunction of like their parents in like in a real way, like not like there's like, you know, like there's like other popular music that talks about like, you know, parents not understanding kids, you know, with like the Beach Boys and like Pink Floyd and stuff like that. But it, you know, it just felt, it didn't connect with me because it wasn't as angry. And like when I heard punk rock, I was like, oh, I feel angry. Oh, and they're mad about their parents. I'm mad about my parents too, you know, like my people. So I think like those are the, you know, back to what we said about like, you know, a sense of belonging, right? Like, you know, community means like having a space where you feel seen, valued, and understood. And I think for me, like the punk rock scene was the first place where I felt those three things. You know, definitely not by my family. You know, maybe in school a little bit by some of my teachers, but I think for sure, like among my punk friends, yeah.
Wow.
It's interesting. Oh, sorry, Zach.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I mean, I just want to comment on how, you know, I didn't realize that music groups really are also a community that you can belong in, like different groups, until I was a lot older. Because I think growing up, and maybe this was just my generation growing up, the social groups that I had in elementary school, middle school, high school, first started out with, you know, what toys did you play with in elementary school? So did you play with Webkins? Did you play with Barbies? Or did you play with
Yeah,
Legos?
for sure. Yeah.
And then middle school, it was all about the clothes. And where did you buy your clothes? Did you go to Limited 2, or did your mom buy knockoffs from Ross? Or like, did you buy name brands or not?
Right.
And eventually with high school, and I noticed this when I was in high school, that there are a lot of groupies. So whether you like, I had groups in high school that adored Taylor Swift, and I guess I found my friend group really late into high school. I didn't meet my friend group until June of senior year, which is right when we
Wow.
graduated.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's crazy, but we all we were like, they were already a friend group, and I had a small friend group within that group, and we all just decided to go to prom together and go do prom weekend together down the shore, and that's how we really became super close. And I realized that our friend group is, we're kind of like a melting pot, but we all have similar tastes in music. And there are some of us that really love country, but for me, my closest friends, we all love 80s classic rock. And
Awesome.
I remember, like, it's interesting now that we're having this conversation. I never really thought about it, but yeah, my closest friends and I, we bond over, you know, different music groups. Like, we love Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi. We saw Foreigner in concert like 2 years ago.
Wow.
And Whitesnake, and you know, we love Journey and Aerosmith. Like, that's the music that keeps us connected. When I had a friend text me last week saying, "Hey, Open Arms by Journey just came on the radio," and I don't know why, but it reminded me of driving down from the shore like at night at the end of the day and like blasting it with the windows down. And it's interesting to see that music is also a social group. And I don't know why I never really thought of it in that perspective until just now, but I found it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way to, it's like a sort of instant community builder, right? Like the thing that, it's like, you love the thing, oh, I love the thing too. Like there must be other things that in our personalities that align, right? I mean, it's you know, like prior to like online dating, like, you know, like the likes and dislikes on like Tinder or, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, like that was like sort of like the casual, like sort of not creepy way to figure out if like you got along with somebody, right? If you like, if you were just like, okay, books, music, movies, like go. and like TV shows, right? It's like, oh my God, you love Friends? I love Friends. Or like, you like The Office? I love The Office. Like like for whatever reason, I mean, and I'm sure it is, it feels superficial, but like if someone's like, oh, I don't like The Office, and I'm like, I love The Office. I'm like, I don't know if we're gonna like get along, man. I don't like, how do you not like The Office? But I mean, obviously there's like more important things too, right? Like, I'm sure like, like if someone we're talking about like social justice policies or, like the environment or something like that. But it's like, it's just kind of like a funny shorthand that I don't know. I mean, it hasn't failed me yet, so, and I'm not saying that I would not be friends with somebody if like they didn't like The Office, but it sure does help, right? But you can't be like, oh, I like The Office and I'm also racist, like that's like hard pass for me, like, sorry. But I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really liked about your memoir, and I found it like really authentic, is like on the social group thing, is like you can tell that the social groups you're describing are real and like they're not some stupid cliche. Because like
Thanks.
the thing, you're welcome. No, the gripe I have, I don't know if this is just me or if other people feel this too, but like every like young adult setting, like either book or movie or TV show, they social groups are always so cliche and the exact same. And like I don't know that like my high school is weird, but like I don't know that real high schools are like that. Like I really challenge that idea. And like the way you told your story and like how you describe like the setting of like all the different groups and like the conflicts between and like how you are part of that was so authentic, and I really
thanks.
appreciated that. Yeah, of course. And so like I think like one of our last questions in like this segment of the interview we have is like, on the topic of authenticity. In your book, you talk a lot about like balancing like being good at school and loving literature, like that identity with like your punk rock identity, and how they kind of like the relationship between and how they were kind of different. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, I think like part of my growth as a person, especially as a young person, is recognizing that well, I mean, I think like as a kid, like I won't speak for other kids, but I think like I was really binary, right? Like it was kind of like you could either be this or you can be that. Like you can't be both. And and I think part of my evolution as a young adult and then as a grown up is like sort of breaking the binary, right? And breaking the idea that like if it's one, then it can't be the other, right? Like that we're paradoxical, right? Like I sort of reference the Walt Whitman quote a lot, that Walt Whitman in his poem like Song on Myself, right? He says, do I contradict myself? Then I contradict myself, right? I'm large, I contain multitudes. That we're all complicated people, and just because we like one thing doesn't mean that we can't like another thing. And like I think when I had that realization or that understanding, which like the seed of it starts in high school, but like it doesn't really sort of blossom for me until much later, that I recognize sort of like the complexity of who we are, right? And for me, I think like the most important journey is like recognizing my own complexity, and then also being able to sort of honor it in other people, like my parents, that I can look at my parents and see sort of like their strength and their resilience, as refugees, and like all the sacrifices they made, and also recognize like all their deficiencies and like their shortcomings as parents, right? And try to understand where they came from, not to excuse them, but just to kind of like hold them in your brain, right? So I think like being able to hold like two contradictory thoughts, and have them both be true at the same time, right? Like that's kind of like the hallmark of like higher order thinking, I think, and I think it's messy, right? And I think especially in this day and age, I think like we like the Twitter sphere, the internet, and certainly not like the STEM areas like math and engineering don't allow for contradictory problem sets, right? Like I think it's always like 2 + 2 = 4, right? And like the angles have to be right angles and things have to line up, and that's just not who we are as humans, right? Like we're contradictory, we're messy, we're constantly evolving and changing, and I think anything that I can do to put out in the world, like to sort of challenge that or to make space for a more nuanced understanding of who we are, I think that can only be a good thing, because we're not like these sort of like black and white cartoonish, sort of binary humans. Like I think we're really messy. Yeah. So thanks for seeing all of that. So and the other piece I think of, like the authenticity piece, is like, I think that's so hard to think like that. Just the idea of authenticity is so weird to me, because it means that like
Mhm.
there are times when we're being fake, and I don't know what that means. Like I think like this idea of like the wannabe, like you guys like, or like
Yeah.
like nowadays, like what do
Mhm.
kids call them, like the tryhards or whatever, like you know what I mean, like that
Yeah.
idea of like I don't know what that means. Like if I want to be a thing, like what does that mean? Like why can't doesn't that make me the thing? Or like, if I like want to be a jock, or if I want to be cool, like why does that automatically not make me part of that group? Because like I think like, and I didn't experience this until I got to like college and the bigger world, but like when I started hearing other Asian kids, because I didn't know any Asian kids in high school, but like when they started referring to other kids as like, oh, like they're a Twinkie, and I was like, what the fuck's that? They're like, oh, like they pretty much act white. I'm like, what the hell is? I don't even know what, like, like thankfully, like I had like a pretty good sense of myself, but I was like, what does it mean to act white? Like I didn't even know. Like, and I'm like, well, wait, what does it mean to act Asian? You know what I mean? Like, am I so like it just? It's like I just think like you are who you are, and like you are your most authentic self all the time. Like I, and I think that's okay. Like I hope people feel the permission to just like be who they are, and like embrace that and celebrate it, and not worry about like authenticity. Because like here's the short of it. This is like long-winded, but like I think once you set up this idea of like what is authentic and what is not, there are gatekeepers who are going to be assigned to judging what is authentic and what is not. And like that just feels like a bunch of bullshit to me. Like for someone to be like, okay, you are authentically Filipina and you are not, and it's like, what? Like that doesn't even make any sense to me. Like it, and yeah, I think this is really problematic, because because then it doesn't sort of, again, it doesn't embrace the complexity of who we are and the complexity of identity, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that, we talk about it on our podcast. You talk about it through your memoir. It's hard to really be authentic without being a tryhard or a wannabe, because if you really are striving to be authentic and go for that authenticity, then you're putting too much effort into it. And I like what you mentioned about how you hope that people will just celebrate who they are and just really be true to their identities, whether that's, you know, celebrating your cultural identity or whatever identities that you might not be so willing to share with the outside world. And that's something that you teach through your memoir and, through the different Asian podcasts and podcasts in general that talk about culture and just our society now. It's all in the grand scheme of things pushing towards, this is something that we want to talk about, that showcases a little bit of our own true self and what we want to celebrate and what we want to share with the people in the outside world. And I think that if we can push past the idea of trying not to be a wannabe and trying not to be one of those tryhards and just doing it for the sake of, we love doing what we do, whether that's writing, hosting a podcast, be like it, shouting punk rock at the top of your lungs,
Right.
it, whatever it may be, if you can do it with no worries and you're just doing it because it's something that you love to do, that's the ultimate goal, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Absolutely.
So we are going to dive right into the 4 questions that we ask every guest that comes into the Situation Room.
All right. I'm
And
ready. I'm nervous.
yes, I'm going to kick it off with, what does it mean to be Asian American Pacific Islander, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, obviously, you have access to a very rich heritage, and language and culture and food. But I think like we're in a unique position though of, being, Asian American Pacific Islander in the United States, because it means like it's kind of like buffet style, right? Like there's a choice, like so like in the US, like I think there's like this incredible choice. Like I'm cheating because I'm saying like in America. And in America, I think like you get to kind of pick and choose how that plays out for you and what things you connect with and what things you don't. I think it's really I think it feels like much more there's a lot more agency in it than if I grew up in like, let's say Vietnam. Like if I grew up in Vietnam, like there's like a much more limited kind of like cultural menu that I can pick from. Whereas in the US, like, it's like we're gonna have tacos tonight for dinner, right? But then like tomorrow night, like I'll make like stir fry, and then like we can go and so it feels really rich to me. And so I think like I think having access to that and obviously to the community is really powerful. So yeah, I don't even know if I answered the question, but next.
You're good. You're good. All right, next question. What is your favorite Asian dish?
Ooh, like Pan Asian, like any
anything.
Oh my god.
Whatever you want.
All right.
You can list
I'm gonna go with this, and this is not because Emilie is on the podcast. Like it's for me, like really, it's like a three-way tie. Like I mean, I love like a Japanese ramen bowl, like so good, right? Like an udon, so good. I'm basically like a noodle guy, but then I've only had it like 4 times, but like pancit
Yes.
bihon is like, right, so good. Like it's basically like the Filipino version of like pho. And then of course like in Vietnam, like pho is like amazing. Like my mom's pho is like, top notch, which like every Vietnamese person says, right? Like but yeah. So yeah, basically like all the noodle dishes.
Oh, you can't go wrong with noodles.
No,
Never.
you really can't. No, never.
Okay. Next question. Who is your AAPI role model?
Oh man. Gosh. So hard. I love I know he's like fictional, but like Glenn from The Walking Dead.
Okay, yes.
But like specifically Glenn, Yeah. I mean, obviously I love, Steven Yeun, but like Glenn in that like he's like a survivor in the apocalypse, right? And like he has like moral clarity and like, I don't know. I just like there's just something about him. I like in watching the show. I was like, oh my god, like I really identify with him. And and it's mostly just about like sort of maintaining moral clarity and being a good person in the face of like sort of terrible odds. And that seems to be like at least the refugee story a lot of times, right? So so that really speaks to me. So yeah, fictional Asian person, but Steven Yeun's also awesome.
I like
Glenn, but Glenn in The Walking Dead is kind of my hero. Yeah,
I love it. Our last question is, how can people connect with you?
So I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Phuc Skywalker. So nerd. So yeah, I'm on there. I'm not on Twitter or anything like that. But yeah, so I just post like random weird things on my Instagram, and I'm pretty active on there. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So where can people find your book as well?
Yeah, it's available. Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, it's available at all your local booksellers. Obviously, I always encourage people to buy from their local independent booksellers if they can. But obviously, like Amazon is great. And I'm, but yeah, I mean, you can get it pretty much anywhere. Yeah.
Wait, you also recorded your own audiobook too, right?
I did. Yeah. So if you want to hear me read the audiobook, so I did that. Yeah. So it was. And I think it was on Audible's like top 5 like audiobooks for 2020. So
whoa.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Me and Barack Obama. So I was like literally like a picture of my book next to like Barack Obama's book. I was like, oh shit. I was like,
I
this
was gonna
is
say,
not.
wait, Barack Obama's book is on the top 5.
Yeah, I know. Super
Wow.
scary. I was like, somebody fucked up. Like, I don't know why I'm on that list, but yeah, there I am. But yeah, so yeah, I guess I didn't do too bad of a job. So
I
yeah,
love it.
yeah, awesome. Thanks,
Amazing.
guys. Yeah.
Of course. Well, thank you again. Thank you to Phuc Tran for coming into the Situation Room today and having this conversation with us. Guys, if you're interested in anything that was mentioned during our interview, definitely check out our show notes for this episode on our website, www.situationroom.com, and pick up a copy of Saigon. Like, this was an incredible book. Zach and I both read it. We both loved it. It's definitely one of our stories that we would recommend to all of our listeners. It's on our blog post. If you go onto our website and check out our blog, 10 books to buy for the holidays. I know it's past the holiday season, but those are still really good books. So definitely check it out. Check out Saigon. And yeah, thank you so much, Phuc, for coming in
Yeah,
today.
thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah, yeah. Good luck with your semester.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Dish It Out table. For those of you who are new to our show, this is the foodie segment where we sit down and we dish it out with some of our foodie favorites from our own cultures, as well as bring in dishes from other cultures in the Asian American Pacific Islander community for you guys. So last episode was a challenge episode. So for this episode, we are bringing it back home and talking about some of our favorite dishes from our own cultures. And as always, I'm going to kick it off with one of my favorite home dishes. I feel like every episode I say this dish is one of my favorite dishes. But
Got a
I
lot of
promise you
favorites.
guys, every dish is a favorite because when we're in planning, I put all of my favorite dishes at the top. So for the next couple of episodes, it's just going to be my favorite dish.
And for the past however many.
For the past like season and a half, it's just, this is my favorite dish. But for this episode, I am bringing a classic Filipino dish to the Dish It Out table today. I'm going to be talking about sisig. And for those of you, my Filipino homies, and those of you who do know Filipino food, sisig is a classic dish. This is usually served on a sizzling skillet. It's minced pork, and this is going to turn some people off, but this is all the byproducts of the pig. So snout, ear, traditionally it's served that way. And then it's also served with chicken hearts or chicken liver. But nowadays, we don't go through all of the hassle of preparing each of those different byproducts. So we just use pork belly, and if we can, we'll add, maybe we'll throw on some chicken. But sisig is one of my absolute, actually, this is probably my absolute favorite dish in Filipino cuisine.
Can I quote you on that?
Yes, you can. And I love sisig. So it's usually the minced pork or chicken, or honestly, a lot of Filipino restaurants will do different types of sisig with different meats or seafoods. I've had butterfly fish or bangos as served as sisig, and it's honestly incredible. And I've also had squid sisig, which is really good. But it's minced meat served on a sizzling skillet, and there is a mayo base mixed in with the meat, so it's creamy, it's savory, it's salty. And then there's also minced garlic and onions in the dish, and chili peppers. And then if you're doing it right, you serve a fried egg right on top. And you pop the yolk once it's served to you, and you let the yolk drizzle all over the meat. And you, as always, because in the Philippines, you have to serve it with rice. There is no other way to have sisig. And this is also considered a bar food in the Philippines. So people will have sisig and enjoy it with a beer. But
All right.
I love this dish.
It sounds good. It sounds very good. I'm down to try it. I think I saw it on the menu at the Filipino place in 1-800 Lucky. Am I wrong?
Yes, they do have it's liempo sisig. So liempo in Tagalog is pork belly.
Oh,
So it's a pork belly sisig, and it does have, I don't think it has the chili peppers in it, but it does have the garlic, the onions. It has that mayo base with the pork belly, and it has that fried egg served right on top.
yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Also, you gotta use all the parts of the animal. Kind
Oh
no
yeah,
waste.
100%.
Got no waste out here. That sounds awesome. For my dish it out dish from home favorite, I think you'll probably recognize it as chung fun, is the steamed rice rolls at dim sum. They are delicious. They're hard to eat
Hmm.
with chopsticks because they're slippery, but they're delicious. So it's like a steamed rice dough with the filling. Usually it's like meat, shrimp, or fried dough. I like the fried dough one. The shrimp one's also very good. And so the way they steam it's interesting because they have like this contraption where like the rice dough is like poured on top and then it's like steamed all together into this roll, and then it gets rolled up, and then they pour like soy sauce or soy based sauce on top of it. But it is absolutely delicious. I introduced my friend to it and he did not like it as much as I did, so I ate the whole dish, but it was great. It was great.
A lot of people don't like it because of the texture of it, and it's because you have the shrimp or the meat, and then or the fried dough, and then it's
Mhm.
the slippery dumpling wrapper,
Yeah, it's like
or the rice dough.
it's like a huge, huge roll of fat noodles,
It's like it's like a fat noodle.
but like lighter and airier.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
personally, I love it. When my family goes to dim sum, we usually get it, and we usually get the shrimp, um, rice rolls, and it's honestly, oh my goodness. There is a specific way that one of my friends, I've never seen this done before, but when you're sitting with friends and you're sitting with a group of people and you're splitting that those rice rolls with everyone, one of my friends did this thing where she split it with just two chopsticks, and she kind of,
She like
yeah, she like crisscrossed the chopsticks and just ran it across, and I've
yeah.
never seen people do that. It was really cool.
I feel like I do that on my own plate, but maybe not on the everyone's plate. But yeah, I mean,
Well, with the main dish,
100%.
yeah, I've never seen it like that, but
Yeah.
honestly, it's so good because it's, how would you describe the flavor profile for the steamed rice rolls just in
So
general without the soy sauce, the soy-based sauce?
it's like a noodle, you know,
Yeah.
but like sort of dumpling-esque, like dumpling wrapper-esque.
Yeah.
It's like it's on the plain side, obviously, because it's like a rice dough,
Hmm.
and like the consistency is like kind of chewy, but then the meat inside gives it like
Yeah. It's not exactly gummy in like, I guess, like the texture, but
it's like a little gummy, but not like in a bad way,
yeah,
like because like pasta is like it's chewy,
it's
but
chewy.
can be gummy if it's
Hmm.
bad, but it's gummier than pasta. I don't, this is a weird way to describe it. It's good though.
And this has been the segment where Em and Zach just go off on a tangent on
On the texture of
texture of
chongfan.
the rice dough. But honestly, I've been eating that dish for so long. Every time my family goes to dim sum, we have to order two for the table. If you guys haven't tried it, or if you guys haven't tried sisig, that's definitely two dishes that you guys have to add to your must eat next list.
Yes.
But yeah, if you guys enjoyed hearing about sisig and chow fang, let us know what you guys think in the comments. And if you guys have specific dishes that you want us to bring to the Dish It Out table, let us know. Send us a message, write us a comment. Let us know let us know what you want us to bring to the Dish It Out table next. Wow, that took a lot out of me.
It's okay. It's late in the night. We were recording a bunch of these. So, yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank you again to Phuc Tran for coming into the Situation Room, and thank you all for tuning into this episode. Remember to pick up a copy, and we'll have some links in our show notes of Saigon. So as always, the Situation Room is produced by Crimson Planet Media. Make sure to check out our website, situationroom.com. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook at the Situation Room for more content.
Yes. And as always, guys, we want to hear from you. So send us messages and dish it out recipes through our website, slide into our DMs on Instagram, send us messages on Facebook, and let us know what you guys want to see next in the Situation Room. But for now, thank you for joining us on this step of our journey through Asian America. My name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach King.